I got in so much trouble on Twitter over the weekend for saying something that is just obviously true. Here's what I said. I don't want to misquote myself by even one syllable. I said, unpopular opinion, civil leaders do, in fact, have emergency authority to suspend temporarily many legal rights. That's true. And my point being that the New Mexico governor is wrong in particular here. One, because as that reporter pointed out, the criminals aren't going to stop carrying their guns because of this emergency declaration. Two, because the people of New Mexico, the law-abiding people of New Mexico, actually need a gun more than ever. They need to be able to carry a gun more than ever because of the insane amount of crime in Albuquerque. And three, because the incident that took place in the road rage, though tragic, does not constitute an emergency. So that's the reason why what she did is wrong. But she's only wrong in particular. She's not wrong in principle. And conservatives, oddly enough, seem to be misunderstanding this. But the point I was making, that civil leaders have emergency authority temporarily to suspend rights, that is not a particularly controversial point of view. I mean, I guess it is now, but it has never been controversial throughout all of American history, throughout all of the political history of the entire West, on either side of the aisle or any of the different political participants in our country. The basic principle has often been articulated in America as the Constitution is not a suicide pact. In other words, all legal rights are important. The law is very important, up to and including the Constitution. But when the whole of the law is threatened, then a rigorous, meticulous adherence to the letter of every single individual aspect of the law is actually going to undermine the law, because you could lose the whole law and the whole political order to anarchy or to, I don't know, an insurrection or an invasion. I guess those would be the extreme cases where I think everybody has to grant my point. If the United States were suddenly invaded, well, I guess we are being invaded. If the United States were being more obviously invaded, and there were a major insurrection, not some Midwestern grannies at the Capitol, but an actual insurrection, would martial law, for instance, be called for? Yes, of course. Would you rather throw away your whole system of law because you're going to uphold every single little statute everywhere, or no? Would you take care of the problem and then bring back the law? I think we all agree, if martial law is a thing that exists and has been exercised a number of times in American history by some presidents who we like, some presidents who we don't like, then the principle holds true. You wouldn't want to give away the whole of the law. A good piece of evidence that my view is not so crazy is that Ted Lieu, who's one of the most frustrating members of Congress out there, tweeted out, he said, "This order from the governor of New Mexico violates the Constitution. No state in the union can suspend the federal Constitution. There's no such thing as a state public health emergency exception to the U.S. Constitution." So Ted Lieu saying, no, we have to always rigorously follow the letter of the law. I guess Ted Lieu now supports concealed carry. That's great. I didn't think he did, but I guess he says that he does now. David Hogg, who's that 12-year-old, I think now he's 30, but he started out when he was 12. David Hogg is this anti-gun campaigner. He says, "I support gun safety. There's no such thing as a state public health emergency exception to the U.S. Constitution." So the fact that two huge libs are on one side of the issue and I, a conservative, are on the other side of the issue. Some people took this to mean that the world has gone crazy. And can you believe it? Even David Hogg, even Ted Lieu. No, they hold this view because they are liberals, because they're extreme liberals. And I hold this view because I am a conservative. This view, though, has been held by conservatives, by liberals, by everyone going back. Thomas Jefferson probably said it most clearly. Thomas Jefferson wrote in 1807, "On great occasions, every good officer must be ready to risk himself in going beyond the strict line of the law. When the public preservation requires it, his motives will be his justification." That's a pretty strong statement. His motives will be his justification. There are extreme cases where the laws become inadequate to their own preservation and where the universal recourse is a dictator or martial law. So lest there be any confusion as to how far Thomas Jefferson, who is probably our most open-minded, classically liberal founding father. He said, no, at certain points, if the whole of the law is threatened, if the whole of the nation is threatened, then you've got to take care of the emergency and then go back to the law. Jefferson went on further. A strict observance of the written laws is doubtless one of the high duties of a good citizen, but it is not the highest. The laws of necessity, of self-preservation, of saving our country when in danger are of a higher obligation. To lose our country by a scrupulous adherence to written law would be to lose the law itself. This is almost exactly what I just said. With life, liberty, property, and all those who are enjoying them with us, thus absurdly sacrificing the end to the means. And Jefferson finally says, the line of discrimination, because some people are going to say, well, how do you know when it's really emergency? How do you know this won't be exploited? Jefferson addresses this. He says, the line of discrimination between cases may be difficult, but the good officer is bound to draw it at his own peril and throw himself on the justice of his country and the rectitude of his motives. Wasn't just Jefferson, Hamilton and Madison made similar points in The Federalist. John Adams exercised a, not quite a suspension of the law, but a strong circumscription of the law in the Alien and Sedition Acts, a strong curtailing or limiting of the First Amendment. You saw, obviously, Abraham Lincoln suspended habeas corpus. Generally, we like Adams. I think most people like Abraham Lincoln. It's been used by bad presidents too, Franklin Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson, but it's been used a lot. We've had martial law declared in the United States on a number of occasions because of war. In the case of the city of New Orleans during the Battle of New Orleans, we've had it declared during natural disasters, Great Chicago Fire, 1871. There's some other ones, 1906 San Francisco earthquake, Omaha race riot, 1920 Lexington riots. So where does this idea come from? It goes back even earlier than Thomas Jefferson. It goes back to this notion that the welfare of the people, the good of the people, is the highest law. Salus populi suprema lex. This is a law that comes from Cicero in ancient Rome, Cicero on the laws, but it was rearticulated by none other than John Locke, the father of liberalism, classical liberalism, a man who was fairly influential, though his influence has been exaggerated, but fairly influential in the American Revolution. He wrote this as the epigraph to his second treatise on government. This is John Locke's most famous book. He said that this is a fundamental rule for government, that is the highest point of the law. Right now, text Knowles to 989898. Vladimir Putin called the US dollar's drop in dominance objective and irreversible. It's not a great Russian. Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa formally have agreed to use local currencies in trade instead of the US dollar. As demand for the dollar weakens, the buying power of the dollar weakens. This is why Birch Gold is busier than ever. Investors and savers are looking to harness the power of physical gold. Sheltered in a tax-sheltered IRA, you can protect your IRA or 401k by diversifying with gold from Birch Gold. As the US dollar continues to receive pressure from foreign countries, digital currency and central banks, arm yourself with information on how to protect your savings. Learn if gold is right for you too. Text Knowles, KNWLES, to 989898. They will send you a free info kit on gold with an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau, thousands of happy customers, and countless 5-star reviews. I trust Birch Gold to help you diversify into gold. If a central bank digital currency becomes a reality, it will be nice to have some gold to depend upon. Text Knowles, KNWLES, to 989898. Some people point out, they say, well, Michael, where in the Constitution does it say that there's an exception to this? First of all, it's alluded to in at least two parts of the Constitution, but even let's go beyond that for a second. If the exception were included within the text of the statute, the law, or the Constitution, it would not constitute a true exception. We're talking about something at a higher level than the mere text. That's what Jefferson's talking about. That's what John Locke is talking about here. That's what Cicero's talking about. And in fact, this principle has been upheld by the Supreme Court, or at least articulated by the Supreme Court, on at least two occasions explicitly. In 1949 and 1963, Supreme Court decisions explicitly said the Constitution is not a suicide pact. So why do I bring it up? Because I said at the beginning, I'm not bringing it up to justify the New Mexico governor's actions. I said in the case of what she's done, this is wrong. But it's wrong for different reasons than we conservatives are saying. And I think the reason that Ted Lieu and David Hogg are on one side of this argument and I'm on the other is not because the world has gone crazy, but it's because the liberals don't want conservatives to recognize this point, that when the whole of the law is threatened, it is not only our right, but it is our responsibility to, in certain narrow extreme cases, go beyond the mere letter of the law to save the whole of it. The most perspicacious response to my, I thought, basically uncontroversial point on Twitter was that they said, wow, it was a liberal who said it. The liberal said, this New Mexico governor's decision was so moronic because it's going to empower conservatives to begin to exercise this line of thinking. And I think that's the point. We conservatives traditionally have always been pretty practical, pretty grounded in reality, pretty focused on tradition and history and how the law actually works. In the last few decades, we've gotten very ideological. We've taken a ton of bait from the liberals. And so now we speak in these abstract rights almost exclusively, and in a way that's ahistorical and in a way that is not very effective. Because we can whine and scream and we say, this is hypocrisy, that what she's doing, this is unconstitutional, this isn't right, we have our rights. And that's going to be the epitaph on the gravestone of conservatism. Imagine if the shoe were on the other foot. Imagine if we did this. Well, no, in principle, her point is right. And we should fight her on the particulars. This is not an emergency. This is not going to help anything. We should fight her in court. I don't think this thing is going to hold up. And then we should also exercise the correct principle that she is here exercising. In what case would you say we would do that? Well, I mentioned earlier that an invasion would be a good example of a time when we could go a little beyond the ordinary operation of the law, because an invasion threatens our entire political order, threatens the whole of the law. Unfortunately, we have not been able to stop the invasion on our southern border, because every time, even Donald Trump, who was really relatively strong on this, when he would try, all of a sudden, the mechanisms of the bureaucracy and the supposed meaning of the strict letter of the law said, no, you can't stop an invasion of foreigners into your country. Now, Trump managed to get around this one time, and you know how he did it? By curtailing and suspending the ordinary operation of the law through Title 42. He said, okay, the libs are going to declare an emergency with COVID. I'm going to use that emergency with COVID to greatly reduce the flow of illegal immigrants into the country. Very important. And then the Biden administration runs and they say, we're going to get rid of that Title 42. Perhaps if conservatives would stop believing a bunch of hogwash about American history. I mean, the notion that so many conservatives didn't understand that the Constitution is not a suicide pact tells me that even on the right, forget about the people on the left who are very confused about American history, even many people on the right believe a whole lot of things about American history and government and political philosophy that just aren't true. A lot of us believe fairy tales that were invented in the middle of the 20th century about America as a fundamentally liberal democracy, and America, how there are no complications to any of our abstract rights or anything like that. That's just not true. And it has really hampered our ability to wield political power effectively. This woman knows how to wield political power. Now, I think she's gone too far. I think she's wrong in the particulars. I think this is I don't think she'll be able to extend this after 30 days. She might not even be able to make it the full 30 days. And even if she does, it'll be litigated in court. And it's a one aspect of a hotly debated part of the Second Amendment. I don't think this is going to be the end of the world for New Mexico. It's a stupid decision, but it's not going to be the end of the world. But the principle that she's articulating, if we were to accept it, would perhaps allow us to get around the very unjust wielding of the strict letter of the law on legitimate national emergencies. I'll leave my point at that. Boy, what a great clip that was now. Make sure that you ring that bell, subscribe to the Michael Knowles podcast. We'll see you next time.